Fala galera, beleza? Como é que você está? Eu sou o Xande trazendo mais conteúdo de Genshin Impact para vocês. Conteúdo antecipado! Só que eu não sou Royal Creator e não tenho acesso. Então, um cara que eu respeito bastante e gosto do conteúdo dele, Win2Lose. Recomendo seguir o cara. Ó, daqui a pouco o cara chega a 500 mil de inscritos. Vou reagir ao vídeo deles aqui, dar a minha opinião. Quero que vocês também sigam o Win2Lose, que ele é foda. Vou cortar isso aqui que não pode falar palavrão no início do vídeo. Não pode. Deixe seu like, se inscreva no canal. E bora tirar as conclusões disso aqui do... fazer o react da Lauma.
Luna 1, and she is one heck of a complicated llama. In today's
Como
video,
assim?
we'll see if
Ele tá
a
dizendo que ela é
llama
muito
is what was
complicada.
needed to help Dendro bloom back into the
Isso aqui é interessante. 480k? Deixando aí muito DPS no chinelo.
meta at Constellation Zero and with various weapons.
E ele usou C0, hein? Win2Lose Game. Boa escolha de musiquinha.
Now, as our first Nod Cry character, there is just
Sim.
too much to talk about.
É a
in
primeira
regards to
personagem
Llama.
Nod
I mean,
Cry.
she introduces all
Oficialmente, né? A gente meio pode considerar que é Inefa, né?
new blue mechanics and also all new deer-related abilities. But no problema, because I'm here for
Memezinho com
all my deer
piadinha.
viewers to hopefully spit out some
Trocadilho
llama
na gringa.
facts. And if you're as hyped as I am for, then there's
Eu
a
tô
newish
hypeado, tô
hype
hypeado.
button on YouTube. Just hit that like button down below, and then there's a hype button
Precisinho
that sometimes
básico.
appears. And you can smash that to show how hyped you are for Nod Cry as well. This video was filmed on the early
ele
access server
pode
and is
usar
not
aí o
indicative of the final
servidor
product.
de
There may be
criador.
some changes on release, so be sure to check the
Por isso que eu não
comments
tenho
down below
acesso,
to
não
see
sou
if
Royal
there are
Creator.
any. And here's an exclusive 60 Primo Gems code for you all because you liked and subscribed. Just check the description for a
Será que
link
esse
to it
código ainda
and or
funciona?
the code itself. Now, Lauma actually has a very unique charged attack, where she goes into this deer form with a somewhat elevated
esse é o ataque
movement
carregado
speed.
dela.
And very interestingly,
Isso não tinha percebido, o ataque carregado dela.
she actually kept her two very large antlers and actually
É.
even made those
É
antlers
isso que você
larger.
percebeu.
And this form of deer exploration
Foram os grandes, largos chifres. É.
actually
Foi.
jump twice, but it does consume your stamina.
Pulo duplo?
And I'm also pretty sure that deers can swim, but unfortunately, Llama, well, I
pô.
guess she can swim. She just
Queria que ela fosse na água daquele jeito.
can't swim in deer form, which is a bit unfortunate. And deers can also climb to a certain extent as well, but Llama cannot climb, and instead you're going to be relying on
no.
her double jump to potentially get
Iria atrapalhar a Marruíca, não pode.
her into slightly more elevated locations. And one interesting detail about Llama's deer form is that it actually has a cooldown. So we can see here,
Como assim?
during the cooldown, she can use her catalyst charge attack, but her antlers also go dim when the cooldown
Tem
is
cooldown
cooling
carregado?
down, and then it lights back up once her
Que
deer
coisa! Quando o chifrinho volta, volta
exploration
carregado.
capabilities are back online. And check this out.
Ah.
Thanks to her double jump, she can reach insane
Ah,
heights.
double jump é
Dude,
legal.
that's crazy.
Double
Now,
jump
as
é
for a
legal.
speed comparison, Llama is disappointingly slow. Now, unsurprisingly,
Caralho,
you know,
ela
a
fica só
deer is slower than a
flutuando, ela é
motorcycle. That
lerdinha.
makes perfect sense. But surprisingly, she's
Caralho,
slower than
sacanagem.
Zhongli's long legs just hoofing it. Now, fortunately, not all is lost when it comes to Llama's exploration capabilities, because she's able to detect local Nod Cry specialties
Bom, isso é
on
bom.
the
Isso
minimap.
ajuda
And
demais.
after some strategic interactions with gravity,
Ai!
we can actually pay a visit to
Sacanagem.
Llama's fellow dear friends. You'll see that. Okay, what's gonna do? Whoa!
é, os
That
amiguinhos
actually
enviados
healed
por ela.
quite a bit. That is some
É.
fantastic healing from our dear friend. Okay,
De novo a
enough
piadinha
horsing
dear
around.
friend.
Let's take a look at her build
Ah,
and
build.
kit. For her weapon, she's using the Ether-like spindle
detalhezinho
loop
nessa
for
arma
most of the
aqui, que vai vir
video.
de graça, tá,
Although I will
gente?
showcase her signature weapon and the Widsith as well. For her artifacts, at least for a decent chunk of this video,
o novo artefato, o novo set de
She's
artefato.
using the new set, the Silken Moon's Serenade, with elemental mastery
full
on the timepiece,
proficiência.
goblet, and circlet.
É bom
There
ter
are also
recarga
a
dos
couple
status.
showcases with the other new artifact set, Night of the Skies Unveiling. I also shifted artifacts around a lot, so this build might not be 100% accurate, but it's close enough. Of course, she's at Constellation 0 throughout, and her talents are at
C0.
9, 9, and 9.
Triple 9? Tá. Eu vi muita gente falando que não precisaria muito do ataque básico. Ele botou 999. Vamos ver.
Okay, you guys have got to see her basic attacks, and we're of course going to bring this to our good old
Tem o negócio das
Registrying friend.
luazinhas.
And look at that! Lunar Blooms!
Lunar
It looks
Bloom.
so weird.
Show.
A Dendro looked weird when it first came out, and now Lunar Bloom looks even more weird now that it is out. And you can see, of course, being Calcius, she can apply Dendro with her basic attacks. And basically,
Tá,
it's
já no
like
ataque
Bloom,
básico, é
but
catalisadora.
shinier and at the cost of a 5-star character. Now, before we move on to the actually important parts
Isso é
of the kit,
engraçado.
we need to learn a bit about some new Nodcry mechanics, such as Verdant Dews and Lunar Bloom. Lalma converts the Bloom reaction to the Lunar Bloom reaction, and despite the strange italicized gradient field trademark pending Lunar Bloom
Meu
text
Deus,
appearing,
paralelepípedo.
these
Palavra grande.
blooms created via the Lunar Bloom reaction all have the same properties as a normal bloom and still just do regular bloom damage. And
Tá.
yes, that includes other blooms like Hyper Bloom and Burgeon as well.
Quando
Main
fala, tá
difference
mesmo
with
dano.
these Lunar Blooms is that you'll generate a Verdant Dew
Sim,
or
as
one of
luzinhas.
these moon things which fills up one every 2.5 seconds. You can hold up to 3 of these Verdant Dews, and certain characters can use these Verdant Dews in one way or
Inchou
another.
as 3 luas. Aí o dano aumenta.
But wait!
There's more!
We'll very
Ah.
briefly have to talk about Moonsign as well, another new Nodcry mechanic. And don't worry, I'm working on another video to better explain this.
Tá, eu vou-
Basically, as of
Eu
6.0
aguardo ver sua explicação. Isso aí tem muita mecânica pra vir.
release, there are 3 characters with a passive that provides one
Lama tá na
Moonsign
equipe, a equipe vai ganhar. Esse Moonsai vai aumentar por um nível.
level. These characters being
Ah,
from Nodcry
eu acho que eu entendi.
are Lauma, Aino, and Anefa. So with one of these characters in your party or
Sim.
one Moonsign level, you get Nascent Gleam. And with
Huh.
2 Moonsign characters in your party, you get Ascendant Gleam, and Nascent Gleam is still active as well. Various artifacts, weapons, and
Sim.
characters have effects based on whether or not
Se
you
tem
have
um ou dois
Nascent
personagens
and
Nodcry.
or Ascendant Gleam. Finally, non-Moonsign
Meu
characters
Deus, olha quanta coisa. Ascendant Gleam. Aumentando os talentos e a habilidade de personagens com essa característica de Nodcry.
also provide a buff
Meu
to
Deus.
lunar reactions if you have Ascendant Gleam, which again I'll go over in much more detail.
Melhora tudo. Se o personagem, tipo o elemental do personagem é Pyro Electrocry, aumenta o dano a cada ação de ataque, aumenta o dano baseado no HP de Hydrogel e meu chapéu.
Detail in a full guide on this.
Nossa senhora.
Ooh, okay, now that
É um
you know
excelente
what
buff.
Verdant Dews are and Moonsign are, let's take a look at her elemental skill.
Meu Deus. O E gigante também. Tá, eu quero ver a lua crescendo o
Frankly,
negócio
her
lá.
elemental skill does, well, way too much stuff, but upon using her
É, muita
elemental
coisa pra
skill,
ler.
it summons a Frost Grove Sanctuary,
Ah.
aka this deer thing that
Frost
attacks you
Grove
by enemies
Sanctuary,
once every
tá.
2 seconds, and applies
Cada
1
2
gauge of
segundos.
Dendro on each attack. Now, the raw Dendro damage that her skill does isn't fantastic, but it scales off of attack and elemental mastery.
Esse barulhinho de bichinho de apertar.
More importantly, it shreds enemies' Dendro and Hydro
É redução de resistência elemental.
resistances. 25% resistance shred
Wow.
at talent level 10, and yes, this
Vale coroar, hein?
is pretty much most of Nilo's Constellation 2 built into her
É
base
aquilo que a
kit.
gente falou. Basicamente é uma C2 da Nilo na C0 da Lauma.
But what makes this deer feel particularly amazing is that it follows Lauma and has perfect radial AoE,
Sim.
consistently applying Dendro around her and
Blue é ótimo para equipes.
freeing her from circle impact. And now, well, we can talk about how her skill utilizes the Verdant Dews that I was
tô
yapping
mais
about
curioso com esse
earlier
negocinho da
through
lua.
her hold elemental skill.
Vai, pula. Edição. Pronto, de volta. Opa, 100k? Já melhorou o negócio
By
aqui.
simply holding the elemental skill button, Lauma gobbles up any whole Verdance dues, and for
Realmente
each
tem
whole
isso, eu tinha
Verdance
visto
due
uma
that
coisa
she
da
gobbled
beta.
up, she'll deal this amount
Você junta as luazinhas e solta um carregado. Aqui, ó, to hit hold.
of elemental mastery scaling lunar
Espera
bloom
carregar as
damage.
3 luas e dá o
Yes,
carregado.
this is the first and only way to deal actual lunar bloom damage.
Vai, Peps.
And this thing can crit and ignores the defense multiplier, thus leading to some potentially
Pensando isso aqui, sensacional. Pode critar. Eu lembro que era uma coisa da constelação da Narida, né?
remarkable damage number.
É o quê? Quase 1 milhão?
Now, using Lauma's elemental skill will also provide the following buffs thanks to her passive, where if you have Nascent Gleam, aka if you just have Lauma on the team, Bloom, Hyper Bloom, and Burgeon damage can now crit with a
Lembra que eu falei no negócio da Narida? Bloom, Hyper Bloom e Burgeon agora critam.
15% chance to crit and 100%
Ah, e tem um detalhe aqui que eu já tô atropelando um pouco. Isso aqui é quando tem só um personagem no Cry, isso aqui é quando tem 2, tá?
crit damage. Yeah, this is basically Nahida's Constellation 2 built into Lauma's
Caraca, um
base
misto
kit.
de Narida
Alternatively, if
e...
you have Lauma
Realmente
plus
um misto de Narida e Nilou.
another Nodcry character like Aino on the team, you'll now reach Ascendant Gleam, and
Ascendant
then Lunar
Gleam.
Bloom damages crit rate
Aumenta a taxa crítica e dano crítico da reação.
will increase by 10% and crit damage by 20%. It is very important to note that you cannot have both of these buffs active at the same time. Now, generally speaking, as of Lauma's release, Lauma tends to prefer to be
Isso aqui eu também quero ver com a equipe Hyper Bloom, porque é pra single target.
the only Nodcry Moonsign character on the team to
102K?
stay at Nascent Gleam to give all the blooms in her party the 15% chance to crit, since the only way to deal any Lunar Bloom damage at the moment is only through her Hold Elemental skill, which,
Tá, tem
while
que
it
segurar.
does do
Ele
decent
falou realmente algo mais cedo, tem que segurar.
damage, is not typically going to be the main source of damage for your team. In the future though, if we get a Lunar Bloom DPS character, then Ascendant Gleam's 40% crit value could prove to be the preferred buff. Okay, so
É, quem sabe no futuro, Nefer vindo aí, né? Pra equipe. Tá, aqui tá com a Lauma R1, Nilou, Kokomi Narida, e aqui Nilou, Kokomi e Aino.
Oh, I decided to do quite a few anecdotal tests and scratch that what I said about Llama preferring to be the only Nodcry Moonsign character in the team, because just by substituting, for example, Nahida with a Constellation Zero Aino, I found that these teams ended up having very, very similar results.
Fato muito interessante por enquanto, ele testou aqui que é algo, tem que ter 2 personagens de Nodcry. Cara, ele testou um com a Narida e outro com a Aino. O empate técnico. Empate técnico, isso aqui, tá?
And this is because Ascendant Gleam is just a very powerful team buff because it gives 60 elemental mastery to the entire team through the Silken Moon's Serenade going from Nascent to Ascendant Gleam, and because we have Nilo on this team for this specific Nilo Bloom test.
Eu vou pôr um adendo aqui, que a gente tá usando a Aino, mas vai que no futuro aparecem outras personagens aí, não sei, Colombina, que faz algo muito melhor. Aí o papo é outro, né?
She's using the Serenity's Call, which also increases her max HP by an additional
Sei que espada é essa, deve ser uma espada nova.
32% thanks to Ascendant Gleam. Not only that, but for these setups, I actually found utilizing, for example, the Night of the Skies Unveiling on Llama
Esse aqui é o set do Flint.
herself to actually be quite effective. And that means another 15% crit rate for Lauma as well. And on top
Interessante,
of
ele
that, we
testou com
even
esse
get
set
the
também.
Moonsign bonus for non-Nodcry characters to boost Lunar Bloom damage.
Isso
So
aqui, isso aqui tá bom demais, rapaz.
all of this, we can actually see that even for a Nilo Bloom team, by replacing Nahida here with Aino and on-fielding Lauma, we're getting some very, very similar performance, which honestly kind of shocked me. And I even had
Ele basicamente falando que deu quase o mesmo resultado.
very similar anecdotal test results for a Hyper Bloom team as well, where both of the teams
Tá, a equipe aqui com Lauma, Kokomi Narida, e aqui Kokomi Aino, tá.
basically performed very, very similarly to each other. And I did make one little mistake. All these tests I did with Llama's signature weapon, but I don't think that makes like a huge difference, all things considered, but it does make a bit of a difference, so do keep that in mind.
Aqui eu achei não, basicamente a mesma diferença. Lembrando, talvez tá usando na Rida aqui. Não sei se aqui eu usasse outro personagem não tão bom de aplicação. Mas enfim, segue o roteiro.
Yeah, anecdotal tests are showing that Ino is actually a pretty decent substitute, even though you lose that 15% crit rate on the blooms. All the buffs, thanks to Ascendant Gleam, seem to be pulling the weight there and making up for that. So yeah, as you can see, Llama's skill is ridiculously cracked and does way too much.
Realmente ele falando que a habilidade dela tá muito quebrada.
We're just getting started because Llama's burst is also La Marvelous.
Ai, agora de um trocadilho, hein? Pause de novo.
And this thing provides Pale Hymn stacks, which are basically bloom-related Shenhe.
Tá, agora tá falando que a ult contém com os stacks. Tá, 6 stacks.
9, each Pale Hymn provides 472.2% elemental mastery as flat
472% da proficiência. Tá.
Damage. In this example, we can see with Lauma having 1,102 elemental mastery,
tá,
the Pale
1100 de
Hymns made the
proficiência.
bloom deal 4,258 more damage. In this
Tá, é
next
de
clip,
quase
Hyper Bloom
20%,
also
né?
did 4,258 more damage, despite, well, Hyper Bloom and the baseline dealing much more damage. And this is how flat damage mostly works, adding the same amount of damage with a couple caveats for Bloom that aren't worth getting into right now. Now, how many Pale Hymn stacks does she get? Upon casting her burst, by default, it provides 18 stacks, and to keep it simple, based on how many Verdun dudes you consume through her whole skill, either before or even after her burst,
Até ele falou acelerado aqui. A gente vai usar isso aqui e vai descobrir.
So to put it even more simply, basically for most rotations you'll have 30 to 36 Pale Hymns.
Tá, a quantidade de stacks eu achei que o máximo era 18.
1,200 combat elemental mastery
1.200 de prof.
at town level 10, Llama basically provides around 216,000 flat bloom damage, which is why her elemental burst is a rather important and powerful part of her kit.
Tá.
Burst also provides a bit smaller of a flat damage buff to lunar bloom damage as well, but as of her release, only one hit from Llama every 12 seconds can take
Nossa, hit a cada 12 segundos, não normal
advantage
meio
of
de
that
um
and
ult.
deals actual lunar bloom damage. So as of her release right now, this part isn't too relevant, but I'm sure it will be relevant in the future. Finally, hitting
Tá.
2 enemies will consume 2 Pale Hymn stacks, so these stacks are consumed much more quickly in AoE situations. Now, let's take
Tá,
a
ele
look
só
at
basicamente com mais inimigos falou que consome 2 stacks.
just how much Llama buffs Bloom damage, using both her Elemental Skill and Elemental Burst to buff Hyper Bloom damage. Now Hyper Bloom is, on average, hitting for 42,804 damage
De média.
after factoring in Hyper Bloom crits. This is around 62% more damage
realmente
than a
aumento de
standard
60%.
Hyper Bloom. As we can see, Llama is a massive buff to Bloom playstyles. Then if we slap on her signature weapon, the Night Weaver's Looking Glass,
Tá, essa é
now
uma boa comparação, ver se vale R1 nela.
each Hyper Bloom is doing around 48,111 damage on average. Another notable improvement, although as a percentage is not
Eu percebi isso aqui, foi 15% de aumento. Quero ver se ele vai comparar com a C1 dela.
as crazy as you might have expected. This massive increase to Bloom related damage is unsurprising, as her kit provides the following. She provides off-field 1 gauge Dendro application every 2 seconds.
Uma
in a
unidade de
radius
Dendro a
around
cada
her.
2
She provides
segundos.
25% Dendro and
Cara.
Hydro resistance shred. Of course, all this
Nossa,
stuff is at
diminuir a
constellation 0.
resistência elemental.
And she provides roughly around 216,000 or so, a bit more, a bit less, flat bloom damage for most free-to-play players. She provides 1 stack of Moon Sign,
Tá,
and she has a
stack do
passive
Moon-
that
da Lua.
increases Lunar Bloom multiplier by
Multiplicador de
14%.
Lunar
Then the
Bloom.
Nascent Gleam buff provides 15% crit rate and 100% crit damage for Bloom,
Ah, é
Hyper Bloom,
recap
and Virgin
daquilo que
type
a gente viu
damage.
agora há pouco.
Or the Ascendant Gleam buff provides 10% crit rate and 20% crit damage for Lunar Bloom damage. Finally, because she enables Nascent and Ascendant Gleam, this will help you provide the Silken Moon's Serenade buff, which is either 60 or 120 elemental mastery. And finally, she can provide relevant catalyst weapon buffs. Alright, and we've got a couple
Tá,
quick passives to
recap, segue
rattle
aí, mano.
through, which I just kind of mentioned one, but the first one is that Llama existing on the team with a certain amount of elemental mastery basically increases Lunar Bloom multipliers by 14%.
Uau!
Then we have another
Só por estar
passive
na
which
equipe já aumenta os
increases
multiplicadores de lunar.
deer-related activity, such as increasing her elemental skills, deer attack damage, and shortening
Tem que testar matando os bichinhos.
her deer form cooldown, our dearest passive of all time.
É isso aí que eu também tenho pensando nas
Alrighty, I've got
equipes.
quite a few amazing
Começou
showcases,
com
with the
Hyper Bloom.
first one being the free-to-play
Shinobu, sempre, né?
Hyper Bloom team, and really Lauma definitely takes Hyper Bloom to the next level with, well, you know, obviously her crits
Falando que é Sumero 2.0.
and her basically effectively being a built-in Constellation
Caralho, Lunar Bloom. Lembra que o Hyper Bloom era limitado a 30k, né? Olha o Lunar Bloom aqui, ó.
to Nahida. Although I do want to say
157k.
that Lauma works quite well with Nahida, but in this case I'm of course demonstrating a more free-to-play friendly team
Caralho, Shinobu, Chiquinho e Colei.
with Kalei, Kuki, and Xingqiu. You can see just those massive Hyper Boom crits whenever they did trigger. And up next we
Burgeon. Todo mundo que eu falando de Burgeon tá usando o Toma, tá?
have the free-to-play friendly Burgeon as well. Now, needless to say, pretty much any Bloom variant is going to tremendously benefit from Lauma, and Burgeon isn't far behind
Viu
from,
89k ali.
of course, Hyper Bloom. And yeah, I mean, you're
93k, 157k.
also going to see, you know, probably a couple 90,000 plus Burgeons, which is absolutely cracked. And
Caralho,
you know, I
deletou.
think Llama is going to be a fantastic character for free-to-play
E
friendly
aqui eu acho que é o principal, que é o Bloom, né?
enjoyers as well as those people who enjoy Bloom teams. And one great thing about Bloom teams is that typically artifact quality does not matter as much for Bloom teams. Just try to get some elemental mastery rolls, whatever amount of energy recharge you might need.
Ele diminuiu, dizendo que os artefatos não são tão importantes assim para a equipe de Bloom.
And then you're pretty much set, as well as, you know, an elemental mastery main stat. You don't have to worry about
160k.
double crit and all this stuff all the time. It is much easier to build, in my opinion. So,
Cara, tem Nilo.
oh yeah, I was yapping, but there was Nilo Bloom team absolutely wrecking it as well. And
Já que
here we
melhorou o
have
Raitan também.
a spread Bloom team, I guess. You know, I think I'm more... Oh, Quick Bloom, I believe it's what it's called. This time with Alhaitham as the spread DPS character. And I think it works reasonably well.
Foi, colocou o All Raitan com o 7 lá do Flings.
What's really cool about this is that having, for example, both Aino as well as Lauma on the
Deletou,
team, while it's
tá?
not as good for the Bloom damage, you can use the Knight of the
Oh, Raitan
Skies
C0
unveiling on
R1.
your DPS. And up next we have a Lunar
Ai,
Bloom
quem pegou em Nerfa
Lauma, where I
também.
focus on Lunar Bloom damage with the Widsith, and cool little fact here, Baizu also
Será que
now
vai bater
buffs
mais?
Lunar Bloom damage by a bit. But yeah, here we go. We pick up the Sapwood Blade generated by Xingqiu, and we did just a casual through
348k.
140,000 Lunar
Meu Deus!
Bloom instance of damage. Of course, this team's overall
Eu comecei C2 da Arlequino quando dava 200k. Tá, já tirei meio milhão agora com a... O Citlali C2, mas meu amigo.
team damage is a lot lower, but it is fun to see those Lunar Bloom nukes with the
Está
Widsith.
quebrado,
So yeah,
véi.
not fully recommended, but it is fun. Now, up next we have a Lunar Bloom nuke situation, and I put some better
Lunar
weapons
Bloom Nuke. Caralho.
on Diona as well as Nahida. Diona is using the
passou
elegy for the end to
pro
provide
Jona
some
também.
elemental mastery, and Nahida is using actually Lauma's signature catalyst, and in this case, this will allow Lauma to run the
976k. A sua Mavuíca já deu esse valor?
Widsith in order to get that elemental mastery buff and crit damage. Look at that, 976,951 damage nuke. Yeah, funny stuff to see. And let's not forget about bloom related
nuke.
damage. I decided to do a Burgeon nuke and not a Hyper Bloom nuke, because if you use Hyper Bloom against this specific enemy, it just doesn't work. It gets all weird. But 176,000
176k não
damage
foi tão
Burgeon.
impressionante com
Oh
os
my
com
gosh,
os
we're
outros,
starting to
vai.
see some real numbers when it comes to bloom type damage. What a day to be alive. And up next we have the Nilo Bloom
Parece que esse porra aqui vai estar no próximo confronto abissal, tá?
team versus the Crab Boss. And this Crab Boss is so, I gotta be honest, it's completely egregiously, this is Stygian Onslaught, difficulty 5 against level 105 Crab Boss. And this thing basically is just super susceptible to bloom damage, and Nilo Bloom is a fantastic archetype against this guy. As you can see, the AoE on the blooms allow it to just blow up these, you know, silly mushroom things, which then go and attack
Esse porra aqui vai ter que usar Bloom.
the crab, basically multiplying your bloom damage by a massive amount because those things also, deal damage to the crab based on how much damage you dealt to the thing. And yeah, I mean, this fight is clearly just designed for Bloom, and no other really archetype or team can really deal with it. So if you want an easy time against this crab boss, well, Llama's going to do fantastically against it. So yeah, very strong Bloom support / sub DPS character. All right, now get me out of the kitchen because I've been cooking way too hard, and Llama is actually, in my opinion, a decent support for Knish because she can equip the thrilling
Cara,
tails
melhorando Knish é o primeiro que eu vejo falando isso, tá?
as having 22.5% in the case of this example, but 25% typically. Dendro resistance shred built into her kit, and with almost no field time, she can pass on all these buffs to Knish, and we can just
Ei, man, Knish, Llama pra sua conta?
see Knish doing a casual 290,000 elemental skill
Cara, eu vi isso, mas teve outro de 242k assim, ó.
blast with, pretty mediocre builds with this team. And honestly, I mean,
Tira a resistência a então pra Neuvillette também?
yeah, Llama, in my opinion, Dendro power creep, usable in even non-Bloom teams specifically for boosting, like some Dendro type damage. And of course, I mean, there's no reason why you can't use her with characters like Neuvillette or even Cyno. And unfortunately, I didn't get to cover all of them, but her versatility.
Na minha opinião aqui, o dano Neuvillette tá baixo, mas o DPR, o dano geral da equipe ficou muito alto.
Is pretty crazy, all things considered.
Mais uma propaganda, Paulo. Voltamos.
As we can see, Llama is frankly, in my humble
Ele tentou com cavé. Sabe o cavé do Pix funciona?
opinion, Bloom power creep. Her base kit basically has slightly worse versions of Nahida's Constellation 2 and Nilo's Constellation 2, so for the price of 6 featured 5-star characters, well, you get a Llama. Not only that, but Llama also provides tons of flat bloom damage, and she also deals non-negligible lunar bloom damage herself.
Não parece bom mesmo, não. Concordo com ele.
She is definitely the long-needed upgrade to Bloom for Bloom playstyles to frankly Bloom. And Fortunately, though, I think they actually did a great job designing her kit for two very big reasons, being her two different playstyles. One with Nascent Gleam buffing older Bloom playstyles and making her compatible with our former favorite cast of Dendro Misfits, and with the second playstyle being Ascendant Gleam, where currently it doesn't really have a strong spot in the meta since only she does any amount of Lunar Bloom damage, and frankly it's not a large portion of the team's DPS, but this is certainly foreshadowing for future Lunar Bloom DPS and Lunar Bloom playstyles. And frankly, in my opinion, this is actually fantastic character design, as
também ele fala que é design impressionante do personagem, realmente ela é muito linda, vamos concordar.
Is in a way two characters in one, elevating old favorites.
Falando que é dois personagens em como a gente já falou mais
while
cedo.
Also preparing her and us for the future Lunar Bloom meta. This way,
ele acredita que tá preparando a gente pro meta do Lunar Bloom no futuro.
Llama's not going to feel like, crap, basically, if you use her right now, because she is so good with the current Bloom characters, while also at the same time, she's likely going to be best in slot for whatever upcoming Lunar Bloom teams that we'll get. And, of course, as per recent
basicamente repetindo a mesma coisa que falou aqui agora há pouco.
A lot of very Bloom-friendly content, like the crab fight in Stygian Onslaught.
Ele espera realmente que tenha muitos conteúdos voltados pro Lunar Bloom. A gente espera, a Arroio sempre faz esse tipo de situação.
Multiple patches of content and multiple more patches of content after that whenever a proper Lunar Bloom DPS character comes out, so you can expect Llama to be quite good for quite a while. Anyway, if you like llamas and deers and hate giant crabs, you won't be disappointed by
Você gosta de llamas, eu não sei qual é o animal, cervo, acho que é cervo. Você não vai ficar desapontado,
also,
basicamente,
I know this video
que ele
is
fala.
lacking level 100 characters. Well, for
E
one,
usou ela
the Creator
C0,
Experience
hein?
server doesn't have them. And for two, that's about as relatable to being an oil baron sun. So yeah, that's why level 100 stuff isn't in this video.
Ele tá
Level
falando a
90
parte do
club
nível
rise
100
up.
e tal.
Is very useful. In fact, well, probably best in slot
Muito
with the characters that she...
útil. É mais uma consideração final aqui mesmo. Primeira vez que tô vendo o vídeo. Cara, o Witch mais uma vez cirúrgico e sensacional. Eu sinceramente adorei. Depois eu faço um vídeo aqui falando o que eu acho da Llama. Desculpa não ter feito o vídeo antes, tá, galera? Eu tô bem, essa saúde essa semana tá bem baixa. Mas sensacional, eu acho que a Llama talvez precisa muito do Bloom com a Nilou. Eu não sei se funciona muito bem sem a Nilou, tá? Mas porra, ela bufa
The
tanta
characters that she
equipe.
also power
Tem
creeps.
tanta coisa aqui que ela
Luna-
faz que é simplesmente extraordinário. Eu vou pegar pra minha conta principal, que eu tenho Nilou lá, e vou pensar se eu pego uma Nahida, se eu vou na C1, isso aí eu discuto num próximo vídeo, galera. Espero que tenham gostado desse formato de vídeo aqui de React. Deixe seu like, se inscreva no canal, também se inscreva no Ultiludes, que é o vídeo que eu reagi. Beleza, galera? Um forte abraço e a gente se vê no próximo vídeo. Tchau, tchau!